Okay, how you doing, ladies and gentlemen? We're back again here at allpointstv.com, and we are elated as always that you're out there ready for the program that comes on at 2 o'clock in the afternoon on Mondays. And we can't do this program if you're not there, and we hope you will be satisfied with what we're doing here today and also other programs that we're going to be doing in the future. And we are again here at the number one studio here in Genesee County. We're going to claim that whether it's true or not. We're going to claim that whether it's true or not.
I think it's true. So,
yeah, we think we're at least we're working at it. Let's put it that way. We're definitely working hard to achieve the goal that we've set for ourselves here to be the number one studio in Genesee County, and certainly the number one podcast program that they have here in the area. We pay strict attention to what's happening outside of the limited area here. We're in Genesee County, but we pay attention to the events that are going on around the world. And what's happening right now, as you probably are aware of as of last week, is that they went from there's a big change that occurred last week. It went from a proxy war. That's where the combatants are fighting each other through other surrogate members, and they're taking it on the chin. And the ones that are, how you push people against each other, and then they're doing the fighting, and you're on the sideline, and they don't realize the instigation is going on by those that are in fact pushing together, and they're doing all the fighting and dying, and you're paying for it and arming the groups and so on, and sometimes arming both sides. I'm going to make a couple of points here in references to how I see this this war that's going on right now, that's expanding and has a tremendous potential to explode out of control, because it's a tit for tat type of thing that goes on, and before you know it, it's beyond the point of being contained, because each group ratchets up the military apparatus, and they try to hit back with more force. Now, let me make a point here. There's some things we need to be very much aware of. In America, the appeal is to the lack of morality, in terms of they're saying, well, we'll do, as long as the Americans are not doing the dying, then it's not really our concern that we are financing the war that's being fought. The way they ratchet down the concern about the United States helping the war to continue in Ukraine, in the Middle East. If the dying is the other person's doing it, then the concern supposedly not to be so great here, given the fact that the American people are not dying, because they're not reporting into the dying that is going on, because they are boots on the ground in Ukraine for sure. And I would, and in the fighting that went on with those 200 and some odd, now they're saying about 300 and so many missiles, cruise missiles, and other, rockets and other instruments of war shooting into Israel. Now they're saying that now here's what this is not going to happen. This is what Joe Biden has said. Now let me read this to you. This is coming out of one of the news articles. This man is contending that because they intercepted 99% of the missiles coming into Israel, Biden is calling for Israel to take that as a victory, that it didn't, the damage was minimum, and they didn't do the damage they intended to do. Let me try to find the comment that they made about that, and let you think about what this how this plays out. Anyway, in my article today, This is the 15th. Okay, so here's the information that came out of the news. Here's one of the news reports. This is Joe Biden now. Biden is asking the Israelis to accept the victory that they had, that the attack is over. It didn't succeed. Only a minimum amount of damage was done to one of the bases. I think one child was critically injured, and that child might end up dying. But Biden is sending a message over to Israel that he is not going to back any kind of retaliation that is going if they decide to retaliate, he's not going to support them in it. Now it looks like that would be because he's afraid of the escalation that will occur. You were attacked, you attack back with more force, and they attack back with more force than what you brought to the second tier of the fighting, and it goes on like that until it ratchets up, and then all of the person on the sideline who are committed as allies on the two sides, they come into it, and before you know it, we got a conflagration that is global in scope. And Biden claims he's trying to, he wants to avoid that. Now, it sounds like it's very reasonable, in terms of you want to ratchet things down. But, we've been here before, and something very similar to that. Go back to Marilyn Albright. You might recall that I consider it to be a sucker punch. They sucker punched Saddam Hussein. Marilyn, when that conflict went on between Kuwait and Iraq, Saddam Hussein was accusing Kuwait of doing drilling, not diagonal in terms of drilling going down into the oil reserves in Kuwait. They accused Saddam accused Kuwait of doing what they call diagonal drilling. So rather than going straight down into Kuwaiti territory on those oil fields in Kuwait, the claim that was being made is that they're doing diagonal drilling where they're drawing some of the oil out of Iraq. And that conflict is developing and brewing between the two combatants. Well, Madeline Albright just went over as a mediator, pretty much. And she said from Washington that the U.S. had no role in it and had no stake in it. And there's a dispute between the two parties that had this problem. Now, Saddam does the same thing that you see happening right now. It's the same scheme. Her claim was that the United States is neutral, that this dispute between these two parties that are neighbors and so on and so forth, they have to work that out. And it seems very reasonable. They're neighbors, and if you have to understand, you can't have belligerence to the point of the fighting, because who will win that? You both have to find some way to alleviate the problem without going to war with the problem. But what they did with Saddam Hussein, I think it was like a pimp slap. They invited more aggression on the part of Saddam Hussein by telling him that, thank you, I appreciate it, John, by telling him that they had no role in it one way or the other, and it was a dispute between the two of them, and the U.S. would pretty much stay on the sideline because it was a local dispute, a local matter that did not involve the United States. Saddam Hussein takes that as a license, being the fourth largest military in the world at this point, to teach Kuwait a lesson. If it's between Kuwait and Saddam, Saddam's Iraq, then it's just a matter of then bringing your arms to bear upon it, because now we're going to use force here that may not have been used if they understood the consequences of it. There'd be a widening of the conflict. You can go back and look at this, and you'll see what I saw back at that time period when I was looking at that, and that is that it was like a pimp slap. Saddam then feels he's been licensed to take on Kuwait in a punitive manner and invaded Kuwait. And once he got into Kuwait, Bush stands up and says that, this is Bush 1, that the aggression of Saddam Hussein will not stand. And the Iraqi leader is looking at, what was this about? They told us that they were going to stay on the sideline. They had no vested interest in it, and so on and so forth. He goes into Kuwait. All of a sudden, there's a national circumstance. They go before the United Nations to get them involved in it, to get the approval that Saddam must pull out. But he's already gone into Kuwait, and to pull out then would be an act of cowardice once he finds that there's some opposition to what he had done. It's like they looped him in there to the point he cannot back out at this point. Now he's roped in there. Now the question is, what were the politics in back of that, you think? Because you see, you have to think about what's going on in the back channels. What are the dynamics involved in it? Well, go back a little bit before this conflict begins, and go back to the war that went on for 10 years between Iran and Iraq. Iran had a revolution in 1979 where the Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini had been living in France for a number of years in exile. And then there was this upheaval because they'd been sending a tape into Iran that was underground circulating against the Shah of Iran, the Shah Mohammed Reza Pahlavi. And there was a tape circulating underground, rallying the forces together against the Shah, who was at that point over there, had been over there with Carter. Don't forget, we had the fiasco in taking hostages in Iran, and Carter was defeated for a second term because of this incident here. Because when he tried to do this rescue and it was botched, the ineptitude of that administration came to the forefront during the election year, and Reagan came in and won the election after a lot of things that happened, by the way, in terms of the politics here in this country. And one of the things that happened was that the Republican Party was split because of the Watergate. Nixon had gone out, and in that conflict of Watergate, that whole fiasco in the Republican Party, placing in the presidency 2 unelected officials. One was the president, one was the vice president, and neither of them had been elected. We didn't vote for Gerald Ford, who I think was very interestingly placed there, given the fact he was one of the members on the Warren Commission report that helped to cover up the situation that occurred in Dallas in 1963. He was on the Warren Commission report, one of the several members on that report, on that committee. And I think that is some reason why he is now placed there as Richard Nixon's vice president. They wanted him on that ticket. The one that had been elected in 1972 on that ticket had been Richard Nixon and Spiro Agnew from Maryland, the former governor of Maryland. And Agnew had some baggage, but that's all of them, quite frankly. And if they call the question of their baggage on the table, they all are culpable because they don't have, you don't rise up in the political arena by having your hands clean. That's something in your closet that's happened that if they wanted to bring the question, everybody up there could be in trouble. It's very difficult to be in the ranks and have. I mean, it's not all state to have clean hands. It's very difficult. That's the one reason why Donald Trump is so dangerous, because Donald Trump came out of the business world into the political arena and didn't go through the processes of going up the ladder to the presidency, but came in at the presidential level. And that's a very dangerous proposition. Comes in and not owe anybody anything. No IOUs out there. And both parties are threatened by the independence of Maverick aspect of that, because the ones he has to rely upon are the people that put him there, and the ones that put him there were the American people. Okay. You would think that the government of the people by the people would be what you want, but that's not what they want.
So I saw a posting on it was somebody posted, it was a liberal saying, people are saying that if people say that all this wouldn't be happening if Donald Trump was president, this is happening because Donald Trump was president. I don't see I think that's a serious disconnect from reality, because I think that Trump actually had this in hand with the all the stuff that he had worked for, between the Arab nations and Israel. And so he was the maverick, and that's the reason why his own party. Yeah, he is his own party, because I go back to what the headlines are in this. What your blog was about. It's just like we got this war, but we're troching upon a war, a total out third world war, and the leadership basically we have to have these loyalties. Even though these people, like what caused Iran to attack and retaliate on Israel is the attack that Israel did on the Iranian, embassy in Syria, which is two national sovereignties being destroyed. I mean, basically breached, and then they wonder why they're attacking us. Well, okay, there's a disconnect where, to me, it's like, why did you attack the Iranian embassy in Syria? They have a right to have diplomatic relations with any country they choose to my understanding. So you're saying they're behind Hamas? Okay, prove it. But you're just making a rant. To me, they can't sit there and say be bewildered when Iran retaliated, because they've been rattling sabers for years. So I mean, all this stuff is like it's mind numbing.
Yeah, I'm gonna talk about the Trump factor a little bit later in what I'm going to be saying here, because there's something to be said here, a little bit different than the way it's playing out in the media and what they're saying about the Trump factor. There's a factor here, but it's not what they're saying, and I want to try to bring in something different to explain that, and why Trump didn't have. There was no new war started during the Trump administration for that 4-year period of time. There's a reason for it, but it's not what they're saying. They're trying to act like the world was scared of Donald Trump, and they were afraid to do anything because they didn't know what this man, who they considered to be untethered, that this man would just go off and do something that would be crazy. That is not the reason. I'll try to get to that and try to tie that into what we're talking about. But what I'm trying to do here is to say that we have been here before with something very similar to what is happening right now. Back in the Kuwaiti-Iran war, the U.S. did what it's doing right now. It's arming both sides. That's the U.S. armed both Iran and Iraq in the war of 1980. They really were arming both sides because they wanted both sides to lose. But if you're shooting at each other, it weakens both parties, and those that are sitting there instigating the firing back and forth, they're not involved in any of the firepower being directed at them. They can just simply continue to let it escalate, to which they're then waiting to see what the leavings are, to which they will in fact benefit, because they're weakening both parties at the same time without weakening themselves. That's been really the history of the United States in terms of its wars, because in terms of World War I and World War II, those wars started a number of years before the U.S. got involved in it. And when they got involved in World War I, 1914 was the beginning of the war. We didn't get involved in that war until April the 6th, 1917. In World War II, we were not really in the war in terms of the fighting until Pearl Harbor was bombed on December the 7th of 1941. The war started on the 1st of September 1939 with the invasion of Poland, but we're not involved in the war. We're supplying instruments of warfare, but we're not involved in the fighting until Pearl Harbor was bombed December the 7th, 1941. And when that occurred, then we are involved in the war, dragged into it by the provocation we had gotten involved in the South Pacific. And Japan was, in fact, they took the bait, quite frankly, and jumped into it because there was going to be otherwise colonial enclosure. If they were being enclosed by some of the things the U.S. was doing in the South Pacific. So that would be another thing that was going on. These are things going on in the background that are not privy to the public having a chance to consume what's really taking place. I see a lot of the same thing happening in this war that happened in 1980, because after the arming of the two combatants, with the U.S. playing a role in arming both sides of that conflict, then you have those arms in the hands of Saddam Hussein. Saddam Hussein has the fourth largest army in the world, and now that you've armed that country, and it's a villainous state, threatening its neighbors, and that because its military apparatus is much more powerful than the apparatus of those states around it, and you have allies in that region, then Saddam now poses a threat, and there's no person you can aim the target. He can be aimed to target except those around whom this country is allied with. And now it's important to get those arms out of Saddam Hussein's hands. So pushing him, really pulling him into Kuwait, taking advantage of that dispute where they actually created the conditions through which he would become more aggressive in resolving the problem and would bring about a military solution. Once he did that, was sucker punched in a way into Kuwait, put his army into Kuwait. Now that aggression can be exploited, and you can go before the United Nations, because this is the sovereignty of a nation being invaded, and make the case. Now, you don't see that as a pattern, right? But isn't that what happened in Ukraine the same way? Isn't that what happened in Ukraine? They say, well, Saddam, here's what they'll say. They'll say that Saddam Hussein, back in the time period of that war, was in fact trying to annex Kuwait. And it would not stop there, but it would be some other belligerence and provocation going on, and he had to be stopped in his track at this point because he posed a danger. Look at the invasion of Kuwait as an example of it. In today's problem in Ukraine, Russia goes into Ukraine and invades Ukraine. And the idea here, of course, is that if he is not stopped in Ukraine, then he's going to cover other parts of Europe, because this is a man that's involved, Putin is involved in aggression, and we have to stop this aggression, because if it is allowed to blossom, then he's going to take over all those nations around it: Estonia, Lithuania, Latvia, Sweden to the north, Ukraine, of course, to the 2000 border to the south and southwest. The man has to be stopped. But if you look at how that war started and how they sucker punched, well, what choice did he have? One thing went over and threatened to put Ukraine in NATO, and NATO has 30 states in it, and each one, once a NATO member is attacked, then the 30 nations have to, by their own compact with the other NATO nations, have to come to the rescue of the other NATO ally. Do you want to have Ukraine in there, and you got a dispute going on? Do you want Ukraine going into NATO, so that if you stop them or do anything to that nation at that point, that they're a NATO nation, then your country is facing 31 including Ukraine, 31 states that you are now up against. The mere fact that they were saying they're going to put Ukraine in NATO was enough provocation. Putin does not want to recreate the Soviet Union. It was nothing but a headache anyway. There were no dividends to be paid for it. And the one that does a very good, the expert on this area of the history. This is my view of it. I listen to him a lot because I think he's the number one person out there. There are two of them out there that are the top of their game. My area of expertise is not in this area. My expertise is in a different area. But I know expertise when I hear it. And the two persons out there that have tremendous expertise in this area is the professor at Princeton University, Jeffrey Sachs, is one, and the other one is this real. Well, Sachs is a real scholar as well, but the one that is the scholar on Ukraine and that conflict that goes on there with NATO advancing to the east, that's John Mearsheimer. That this man, in fact, he said last week. I mean, he's a patriot, but he said last week that no country should trust the United States because he knows what's going on here. This idea that Russia wants to annex the rest of Europe. This is Hitler wants to annex all these states around Europe. He's a threat to European sovereignty and things of that sort. That's not what Putin is about. Putin is saying that he is not going to allow NATO on his doorstep. And that may seem to be something that a nation can make up its own decision, but it was a problem for the United States when they tried to do it in Cuba. When they put those missiles in Cuba, 120 miles off the coast of Florida, it was objectionable to the Kennedy brothers. John F. Kennedy was being pressured by the Pentagon and by the military industrial complex that had been talked about on the 17th of January of 1961 by Dwight D. Eisenhower going out of office at that point. And 3 days before he left office, he talked about there was a budging amount of authority being developed in the country where there was influence, whether sought or not, that's accruing to this organization that had been set up under Truman called the Central Intelligence Agency. And he was warning about the festering of this organization that could get out of control if it's not watched and managed. And he warned the nation about there was some power centers that are being created that could create a problem. And his words for it was that it is the military industrial complex. That was the first time we'd heard that. But what he was really talking about, and how we talk about it today, is that he was talking about what we say today was the secret government. And I do see that operationalized in this country today in terms of because I consider the secret government to be that which is visible and then that which is invisible, but that which is a part of it, which is electoral, and part of it, which is just the bureaucratic apparatus that has been created over time that no longer is subjected to the vote and to censorship of those who are the elected officials, but those that will be there after the elected officials are voted out of office and have to go back and forth to the voters to account for themselves, where there's no accountability of the bureaucracy that's there once they come and after they go. And so that elected part of it, and then the part that is invisible, is not elected, that's the deep state I'm talking about. That's the military industrial complex that Eisenhower was talking about in 1961 on the 17th of January of that year.
It's interesting to know, too, a side note, for people historical reference, a major general wrote a book called War is a Racket, Smedley Butler. And he talks about that. This was right after that, around this First World War. And definitely, Eisenhower had been a career military man. And, you would think that a career military man would want the unlimited funding for the military.
Mhm.
But that wasn't the case with Eisenhower, and that wasn't the case with Patton. It wasn't the case with. They realized that they probably wanted to. They actually, Patton expressed that, that kind of stuff, that
Mhm.
information. But this information is, ironically, this kind of information has been brought to the public attention, or attempts were, by people who are military people themselves. That's what I find so kind of like puzzling, is people don't listen to the military people
Yeah.
about these things.
Well, John, when you're out there on that battlefield, you out there seeing the blood and the deaths of troops, and you understand the horrors of war. It's one thing to be out on the battlefield, another thing to be in the ivory tower institutions where you're making decisions in air-conditioned offices. There's always been that conflict between the military and the civilian, power centers, because they see it from different angles. But if you look at how these wars are played out in this country, you see a pattern that has been developed over time. You can go and see it not only in what's happening right now with Iran and Israel. I know Biden is saying he does not want to escalate the war and so on and so forth. The fact is that Biden rearmed Iran. Iran was contained under Trump. Biden armed Iran. And then if you go back and look at what they were saying about the leadership while they're arming Iran, they're talking down Benjamin Netanyahu. They're talking him down in public. There's Charles Schumer calling for, and he's Jewish, by the way, but that's another discussion there too. But he is calling for the ousting of Benjamin Netanyahu, calling for the ouster by calling for early elections and getting him out of there. What that does, though, even though that may well have been something that needed to happen, and so on and so forth, I think you have to worry about why are they intruding into the politics of Israel at this time? What's the game plan here, and what's in back of it? But by calling for that, all you're doing here by rearming Iran is encouraging what was a proxy war, because that's all that's changed, quite frankly. It was a proxy war. Now the two combatants are doing something they had not done before, where Iran fires missiles into what looks like what was a Israel that was in fact being pulled away from, in terms of the U.S. posturing that it was having some problems with his ally, and they told them. I was trying to find where I had a quote here in an article I wrote today about it, that they are saying that they were not going to back up Israel if Israel decided to, in fact, retaliate against Iran. Do you think that they think that that's going to fly? That the country has been attacked, which I think the U.S. is playing both sides against the middle here. But you think that the country being attacked is going to say, well, it didn't do a lot of damage, so therefore let's let bygones be bygones. You think that's going to happen? What's the chance, you think, on a scale of 1 to 10 that's going to happen? On a scale of 1 to 10, it's a 10 that will not happen. And Biden knows it. Here's a quote right here by Biden. Let me see if I can find it on this chart here. Just a minute. All of this is orchestrated. These people are warmongers. Let's see. Here's the information that they aim at the people who are drive-bys that do not have a long attention span, and just simply do the sound bites as if they're peace merchants. Here's a headline for those people. This is a headline that came out last week. Quote, Biden warns Netanyahu, U.S. will not support Israel's counterattack on Iran amid fears of all-out war. President tells Prime Minister in late-night call, you gotta win, take the win after the IDF shot down nearly all incoming drones and missiles. Declare victory and just simply don't retaliate. If you have missiles coming into the United States and your defense is able to swat down all of the incoming ships, all those missiles that are coming in, because you were successfully able to defend it, do you in fact walk away from it as if it didn't happen because it didn't do the material damage that was intended to do? Do you walk away from it, or do you respond to the country that sent those missiles into the country, even if they did not do the damage that was intended? And if you do that, what are the consequences of just walking away from it? Now, Biden is not all there, but Biden does not believe that. He's saying that for the public consumption, but Biden does not believe. He doesn't believe that's possible, nor is he actually advocating that. That's for the American people, because he's in an election year over here too. This is a warmongering situation here where the two combatants, because although Israel is a strong partner historically with Biden, Biden got those radicals in his party. Him, and then Ilham Omar, who's making a lot of noise. Rashida Tlaib down in Detroit is making a lot of noise, and then that whole squad that is threatening to lead some other persons in the exodus out of the Democratic Party. And there's Robert Kennedy over there making some noise as well, and then he's losing a lot of his base otherwise. And that's a concern that he has to have if he wants to be reelected. I'm surprised that he's even running as well as he's running. And last week they said on Joe Scarborough's program, I don't know where he got his statistics from. I haven't seen those statistics, but his claim was that the polls that he had seen showed Trump was trailing Biden 37% to 41%.
I doubt that. I doubt that.
I had a problem with it, John. I didn't think that could be possible either, given what I see out here in terms of the people falling away from it. But all they need to do is get close and create credibility, because they don't intend to have a fair election.
Biden is basically a marionette. Okay, I mean, he's got to tell where to stand, where to exit, he's got to be helped on the stage, helped off the stage, told where to look at, and he even reads the directions on the teleprompter.
Mm-hmm.
No, like repeat. He says he'll read it. Repeat. So this guy he's losing momentum intellectually.
Yeah, he is.
Cognitively.
But I worry about the American people too as a factor, because how forgetful they are in terms of we got 7 months before the election is held, and I worry about the American people. They don't have to. I don't think they won the election in 2020, but they don't have to win the election. They have to make it believable so that they're doing things behind the scene can have credibility. There's no way in the world a person that had, going back to what happened when Obama stepped down after his 2 terms had been served from 2008 to 2016, Joe Biden was the vice president. You would think that the vice president would be the strongest candidate to have the run, being in the administration of the succeeding administration. So you would think that Joe Biden would be in the best seat to succeed Obama. He was vice president under Obama. So why would he not be the candidate? They thought that Hillary Clinton would be a stronger candidate than Biden. And Biden had a reputation inside the Democratic Party, according to what is reported about Obama and Biden, that Obama kept saying that Biden is known to F up whatever, and whatever was going on, he would get it wrong. And he has a history of and he's known in Washington as never having one foreign policy decision that he made that has been correct and has worked out the way in which it was intended to work out. A track record of zero.
He has a perfect track record, a perfect wrong track record.
Yeah, terrible record.
But they would just only hear the perfect part. It's perfect. Perfectly zero.
Yeah, perfectly going backwards in terms of leading the country where it should be going. We should be going forward, and we're not going in that direction, going in the opposite direction. And Biden is known for that. The gaffes this man is doing right now, they are certainly more formidable now because of the absent-mindedness of Biden. Biden has had two aneurysms, two operations for aneurysms, and you can see the cognitive impairment of Biden. I don't know how they can get in front of the camera and say that the man is not cognitively impaired. I heard Dershowitz was saying that. I don't know where Dershowitz was coming. Well, I do know where he's coming from. He's a dyed-in-the-wool Democrat, and justified being over there, he's got to deny some things that he is actually saying, but these things cannot be denied. Even the man walking shows a certain kind of impairment. He walks like he's not, his mind is not all there. And then he's talking and he is delivering a speech, although reading from a teleprompter. The gaps are unbelievable, the mistakes that he makes. Constantly mispronouncing words, constantly reading the teleprompter where you're putting one sentence ahead of the sentence where it should be and having to go back to it. The point is just that you cannot deny what everybody in the country sees. I can't think of a person that can watch Joe Biden and not see the impairment, see the dementia this man is going through. And it's amazing they're trying to tell us that this speech that he gave, where he was hollering the whole time he gave the speech, in terms of the State of the Union address, the man was hollering and screaming at the American people the whole time. And they said it's one of his best speeches, and he was very much on point, and he did things that they didn't think he was going to be able to do. He pulled it off and just making a big deal out of it. The speech is one, I think Tucker Carlson said it correctly, one of the worst State of the Union speeches ever been given. No inspiration. Nobody was inspired by it. And it didn't really give a State of the Union speech, quite frankly, because you really start off the speech saying things like this. The State of the Union, at least say those words. Never said those words. But they'll even if things are going badly, they stand up there and say to the American people, the State of the Union is strong. And everybody stands up knowing that that's not necessarily true, but you stand up and you applaud that because you want to believe the country is in good stead. He never said that in the whole time he was doing the speech. It was not really a State of the Union address without that. He never talked about the State of the Union because, number one, it's so out of kilter right now, nobody would believe that. But you should have heard Hakeem Jeffers the next day. And Hakeem Jeffers being the minority leader in the House, and you would have thought the man gave a Churchillian type of speech. We saw him stumbling over that speech. It was hard to stay there to listen to Biden, but you have to do that because you're a public commentator. You have to listen to what is going on. We can have some idea of what took place because you can't comment on it unless you are paying attention to it. It was very difficult to watch. I was feeling sorry for Biden as he stumbled through that speech for an hour and 10 minutes or so. It was excruciating and embarrassing for the nation around the world. They saw that speech around the world. And they saw this. I know they're asking a lot of questions. What is going on in this country? That you have Biden up there elected by the people with this man being cognitively impaired. In fact, when I go outside the country and travel in different parts of the of the world, I can tell you that many persons don't even believe that Biden is president of the country. They don't believe that Biden won the election, nor do I believe it, as a matter of fact. I've had discussions outside the country about that. I couldn't argue with them about their observation because my observations are the same as theirs.
Yeah, here's the left when Trump was in power wanted to use the 25th Amendment because he had a limited vocabulary. At least he had a vocabulary.
Right.
I mean, I don't know what, I mean, some of the words Joe Biden, I guess they're going to turn it to say he's an innovative vocabulary. He comes up with words that don't even exist. I mean, I'm serious. I mean, they're going to turn it to, see, he's a visionary, No, he's a drooling idiot. Okay.
Yeah, that John, it's amazing. I feel like Jesse Lee Peterson, that's amazing that they would pass it off as if this is normal. This is not normal for a person to be up there at the head of a nation and can't put two sentences together. There's a committee obviously behind the man, and they're writing out his speeches. That's not too bad to do that. They have speech writers. But the man can't read what they wrote for him off the teleprompter. And that's a problem. And to say this man is not incoherent, where is there any evidence of that to be true? The man is totally incoherent. And for them to come after that speech was over that he gave recently, where he gave this speech before the nation and before the world, because the world is paying attention to what goes on here, because they're using our currency. For them to come up behind that speech and tell the world that they did not see what they saw. What they saw was a man delivering a commanding speech. It was commanding performance. And Joe Biden was they're done just great in delivering one of the best speeches of his life. I don't know what kind of speeches that he's given that they were impressed with in the past, but there's no way in the world that could have been his best speech, not that speech. But they were passing off as if this man had done something Churchillian in the speech that he gave. So Biden is now pushing these. I see what's going on because we've been here before. I saw the same thing happening. People celebrate Ronald Reagan right now, but the fact was that there was the possibility that the fiasco with those hostages, if those hostages had been released in October, that had been the October surprise, that would have hurt Reagan's chances of being elected. The incumbent president is very hard to get out of office unless he does something very, very at the end. If those hostages had been released under Carter, it would have posed problems. And there are reports I've read about the things that are going on up to that election, where Reagan is working behind the scenes to make sure those hostages were not released. That is a fact of history.
Okay, Ken, but I'd like to know this. I mean, since he had no political power at that time, other than being a presidential candidate, what kind of power, what kind of authority you would have to make any broker any deals or anything? So
the fact that Carter was unpopular and he would possibly be in the White House, and they have to deal with him. If they had not made some restitution and some claim with his campaign, he could be a punishing influence once he got into power. So they think they don't know, but they think that he might be the president, and based upon that, they're willing to play ball. That goes on all the time outside the country. Countries are constantly playing into, they say, well, they're trying to influence elections in the United States. That goes on all the time. That's par for the course.
Yeah, we try to do that. I mean, let's face it, you just alluded to Schumer trying to get people to vote out Netanyahu. So, I mean,
24/7.
Yes. I mean, it's like, we've always had that. We've always had people trying since the founding of the Republic.
And we do that in their elections as well. We have a vested interest in who is going to be elected in those countries. We are always interfering with the elections. To say that the Russians interfere with our elections, well, not as much as we said they did.
The Obama administration planted in Zelensky.
But if they did that, that is nothing unusual for countries to try to influence, because those countries have an impact upon how they do business in their countries. No country is an island, and they have to pay attention to the politics that's going on in the countries that they deal with. And America's currency is the world's exchange currency. They have to be concerned about what goes on here because they're using our dollar to exchange the currencies around the world. They have to be aware of Washington because of the influence that Washington wields because of that fact. So this idea that we have to look in the back channels. What is going on in the background that explains what we're saying in the foreground? If we don't look at the background, we won't understand it. We'll understand. We'll see where Biden says we're going to. We don't want any retaliation. Biden, I don't care what kind of condition your man is in. Nobody's going to be that naive. No country is going to allow itself to be attacked and does not. In fact, even weaker nations have got to respond to it. Why? Because they be overthrown by the people inside their countries. If the country's attacked and the government does not carry out that which is forlorn as its top responsibility toward its citizens, to keep their citizens safe. And that one missile, 1% of the missiles got through, that's enough right there to demand that a retaliatory response be given. No response, the government is automatically going to be toppled because the people are not going to stand for a non-response. Nobody's saying that they do not want to support be satisfied. It didn't do the damage. Let it go at that. Don't escalate. Biden doesn't believe that. Even his demanded state does not believe that. That's for the public consumption here in the United States. To act like they're peacemakers. They're not peacemakers. They're warmongers. Donald Trump had Iran tied down. Didn't have any money to fund these Hamas and his organizations. And the real reason why Erdogan from Hungary and some of these other nations are saying bring Trump back is not because the world feared Donald Trump. Here's why Donald Trump didn't have wars. It's because he respected their nationalism in those countries. That's what gave him power with those nations, and why this conflagration you're seeing right now would not have occurred. Why is that? Because Donald Trump understood he's going to put America first, and he respected every nation in the world and expected them to do the same thing. What should nations do? They should put their countries first. And Donald Trump was willing to abide by that. That's why there was no interference on the level that you've seen in the past these other presidents who are constantly interfering with the affairs of other countries. The American government has 60 military bases around the world, probably more than that now. And one of the problems is that people are now saying to these this military personnel in their countries, they want Yankees to go home, and I'm not sure they're willing to do that because they feel they have to be invested in the affairs of nations around the world. They're not willing to come home and then have this as their military sphere of influence inside the borders of the United States. They don't feel they should put military troops on the borders of the country right now, which we're facing an invasion. And they're saying 6 million. You have these different numbers. There have been 15 million people been allowed in this country, and they're brought in here as a displacement. You're telling me you cannot protect your borders, but the fact is that if the borders are important to you, if necessary, you bring all your troops home and put them on that border. If your sovereignty is an important factor in your delegation of your authority as president, and you are really taking your responsibility as commander-in-chief seriously, you will not allow your country to be invaded like Biden is in fact doing. But this country is being invaded, and the problem they got is they got Hamas inside the country because it's what Ben Carson said. If you have these borders down, they're porous like they are, and they don't bring Hamas in here, they don't cross in those borders, that is terrorism malpractice. Of course, the terrorists are here. Those porous borders are brought in people that are not vetted, and you telling me that terrorists are not coming into the country, That is impossible. We have terrorists right here in this country right now that came in to those porous borders, and Ray knows it, Biden knows it, Homeland Security, Mayorkas knows it, and the Secretary of State. What's that person's name that is the Secretary of State, the entertainer in that administration? They all know it. The Secretary of Defense, Lord Austin, knows it. I'm trying to think of the Secretary of State's name. That John, what's his name? The Secretary of State of the Biden administration.
Anthony Blinken.
Blinken, that's right, Anthony Blinken. Blinken knows that. They know that these terrorists came across these borders, and they could stop this overnight. Number one, they could stop it by, in fact, enforcing the law against those persons that are over here hiring them into these jobs as they're displacing American workers.
Well, just a few weeks ago, Illinois' judge actually said that illegals could be used in the role of law enforcement.
Law enforcement.
Well, see, that's like you're bringing. See, they could set up cells and rule the area, take over entire towns with impunity. We're doing that. I mean, it's just ridiculous.
Yeah, it is ridiculous, John. The people in New York, there were students in that school on that one school day. The next day they showed up to go to school like they regularly would do, couldn't go there because overnight they had made a decision. They didn't ask the people if the decision was in fact amenable to their interests. They told the children they couldn't come to school that day because that building was being used by those persons that were housing that school for these illegal migrants. You can't even call them illegal migrants. You got to call them undocumented workers. And to use a term that points out who they are, they're here illegally. They didn't come here through the immigration process where you process the person, you decide if you want them in the country or not. And if the decision is made no, then the country has a decision out of its own sovereignty to determine who will allow in on a visa or any other claim. Those cards they give out, which work permits and things of that sort. The receiving countries determine that. But no, they just come across the border. And the claim is that, and here's Biden now claiming, because it's getting close to the election, claiming that he wanted the authority to do so all along, but he's get the authority from the Congress of the United States. They've already passed anti-immigration laws, anti-illegal immigration laws. We have immigration laws on the books. They're not being enforced. Now the claim is that he wants more, he wants the authority. He didn't want to exceed his authority, and he wants to get the Congress to then give him authority where he can act to do what he should have done and has authority to have done all along, but didn't do because Biden waved them over here. Go back and look at the speech what he gave when he was running for president. Well, he said he's going to do this. Those that are coming across the border, he said should come. Those that are seeking refuge, they should come because that's who we are. These are his words. We could have predicted this porous border was going to be the status of this administration. And this has been encouraged, and it can be stopped now. All you got to do is tell all the employers and anyone that hires any person here that's illegal that is actionable against their business and so on and so forth, and they're not going to do that. And I've been in many different states. It's amazing what you see going on in terms of the services they're demanding from this country. And I saw it in South Carolina, I saw it in Alabama, in other parts of the country. We are allowing this because that is part of the plan. And it's part of the plan connected to the plan we see happening in Israel and the Middle East. And that plan is, in fact, being acted out, weakening these nations because this is a global strategy that's being acted out. And we're part of it, caught up in it by our politicians. Okay, we got to pay attention here because we are losing. We're losing the nation. And we got to get a handle on what's going on here. Okay, got to get out of here. Until next week, we want you to follow your dream. If you don't follow your dream, you'll never know what's on the other side of the rainbow.